How's it going, Gwent fans? King Blacktooth here with the Epidemic weather deck that we saw a couple of days ago. Now, some people have suggested that I make a shorter video than that one, basically going over the same sort of things. That was about 50 minutes long and people might not have 50 minutes to waste, so that was a good idea. I've made a concise, shortened video where I just go over the strengths and the weaknesses of the deck, as well as tips on how to beat this type of deck, which is really interesting and useful, I hope. So let's dive right in. On the left hand side you can see all the cards that are involved in this deck. You got your Wild Hunt Riders, your Wild Hunt Warriors. Dandelion is a card which you only put in because there's lack of alternatives at the minute, so that would change in the future. You got people like Nithrel, Ice Giant. These are your character cards, you can tell because they're nice and silver. You got your hero cards in gold. Caranthir, Imlerith, Siri Blink, Trist Butterfly Spell down below. Your Foglets, Ancient Foglets, these are troops because they're kind of a crappy crappy silver, you know, a really dark colour. You've got right, your Dragon is also a character card. Commander's Horn, Biting Frost, White Frost, Epidemic, it's your special cards, and your two spies, Frightener and Katakan. And at the top we've got some information, the deck size, what leader card it used, Dagon, and the creator, a round of Gwent. So some strengths and weaknesses of the deck are that it has excellent ball control and pressure, utilising the weather cards. Now you are going to have a lot of weather cards in your deck. Normally on average you probably get about 3 to 5 weather cards in your opening hand, which is really good. And they're mostly focused around the melee row and the ranged row. Now you can have one chance to play Torrential Rain if it's useful, by using your leader card Dagon, and just by the sheer amount of weather cards is what's really going to win you this game. You're going to be completely pressuring the opponent with just the amount you've got. So when they clear weather, you've got another one to back it up, and you've got way more than they could ever deal with a reasonable deck. No one's going to have that many clear weathers. So the main tactic they're going to utilize is to try and wait before playing their clear weathers. And that brings us on to the next point. This deck mostly negates the waiting before playing a clear weather strategy. So normally they would wait until maybe you've passed before they play their clear weather, or they would wait until you've used a Biting Frost, Impenetrable Fog, and then clear weather later. And this kind of negates that, because if they don't clear weather quickly, you're going to threaten them with an Epidemic, which will scorch all their lowest strength units on the board. So the idea is that you weather them down to 1 strength, and then you take the whole row out in one go with 1 Epidemic, because they'll all be 1 strength, which is just so powerful. This is the combo that you're really going for, okay? And it's also a mind game. Even if you don't have any Epidemics in your hand, when people start to become familiar with the deck, they will start to know that you could have one. And just because you could have one means they would play their clear weathers, you see. So it really becomes a very powerful mind game and strategy later on as well, so as it evolves. So this deck also makes the opponent's weather cards obsolete. So any weather cards the opponent plays, barring Torrential Rain, would actually benefit you, and so they won't play it, unless they're playing a mirror match. Now if you are playing a mirror match, you might consider redrawing a couple of your weather cards and let the opponent do the weathering, because none of you has got any clear weathers, although Dagon might be able to do 1, but you wouldn't want to do it, unless it really benefits you. But normal opponents, Scoia'tael, Skellige and Northern Realms, they might have 1 or 2 weather cards in their opening hand that they couldn't get rid of, and now they are completely obsolete, which is really interesting. Really good. The deck also has quite a lot of effective tools to thin the deck out. So when you get your opening hand of 10, obviously half of them are taken up by weather cards, roughly, but the other half will pull out a lot more than just the 5. So you've got your Musters, you've got your Wild Hunt Riders, and your Ancient Foglets. These will be 6 cards that's pulled onto the board. We're only using 2. Your Foglets will come out for free, which is really good, and you've got your Spies to pull out a couple more cards later. Make sure you've used your Musters and your Weatherbound cards first, if possible. You've got cards like Nithrel. If you've got any Wild Hunt Warriors in your deck, he's going to pull another one out. There are no decoys in this deck, but you may slip a decoy in. You know, you can alter this deck freely. And in which case you could pick him up and place him back down and get another Wild Hunt Warrior out. But there's quite a few things here, as you can like really get a lot of cards onto the board for the minimum amount of cards in your hand, which is really good. So some of the weaknesses are the deck on a whole doesn't really put out a lot of strength. If you're fully buffed, it's probably going to be about 120 that you would want to waste on one particular turn. Obviously, you do have to split it between 2 turns, but that's like buffed by Frost and Commander's Horns. It's not a whole lot of strength, really. And it is very reliant on weather cards. If something goes wrong and you don't have any weathers, then you're probably not going to win because you won't be able to beat the opponents. You won't be able to get into your whole game plan of using epidemics and stuff like that. You have to revert to a more honest strategy of using epidemics, and it's not going to work out for you, in my opinion. This particular deck is countered by decks which focus on siege, in my opinion. You've only got the dragon, in order to beat siege, because that will scorch their siege row. You do also have a torrential rain in case you need it, but you have to really be careful because you can't play a second one. So decks which focus on the siege row could counter you pretty easily. Now, the meta at the moment is melee row, but that is kind of based upon card availability. Not many decks yet have cards available to them in order to make a really consistent, nice combo siege row deck. So that may change when the game is released or in the coming opening beta. The round of Gwent actually did some positives and negatives on his own deck, which are very similar to these, on his own review of his own deck. But one thing I found out in the card draw test that I did was that it was quite hard to get a good balance between the amount of units you want to keep in your hand and the amount of special cards you want to keep in your hand in the opening card draw. Now, normally I'd have 3 to 5 weather cards, and it was very difficult to see whether it was too many or not enough, and you had to kind of predict how many clear weathers the opponent would have and how many weather cards you would use. I also found that on the opening card draw, you spend most of your time just getting rid of duplicates and getting rid of weather-bound cards. Now, eventually, you know, when you keep playing this deck over and over and over again, you are going to get a bad hand where maybe you've got 1 or 2 duplicate cards, which is really bad for you, because you're struggling to get the good balance between units and special cards as it is. So duplicates just really hurt you. So that's about it for the strengths and weaknesses. I think it's actually still a little bit of a scary deck. It's not as scary as it used to be for me, because I've thought about how you would go around beating this deck. And to be honest, you can build a deck which will not heavily negate your efficiency against other decks, which is really interesting. Now, the main aspect on building a deck to beat this one is that you don't build it in the traditional way you think. You don't put loads and loads of clear weathers in there and Sarah, which does clear weathers and decoys, because that's going to really ruin the game for you, any other deck you're facing, because they don't overly use weather cards. However, what you do is try and build a deck that negates the whole epidemic aspect. So if you can try and protect yourself from the epidemic which is coming, then you will be able to wait a little bit longer until the opponent passes to play your clear weathers, and then, you know, you've pretty much won. So the first thing you can do right at the beginning of the game is, if you see the opponent is playing monster, we do get to see what the opponent is playing. If they're playing monster and they have Dagon as their leader card, then you can expect a heavy weather deck is coming. So at that point, if possible, you want to redraw any frost, fog or rain cards that you may have in your hand. If possible, you might need to get rid of something else more important, but if you see this kind of deck popping up, then obviously try and get rid of your weather cards because they're going to be useless. The second thing is to include cards like the prize winning cow or 0 strength medics into the deck. So Epidemic really focuses on weathering down a particular row to 1 strength and then getting rid of all those 1 strength. And the way you counter this is by putting a 0 strength onto the board. So a prize winning cow is a 0 strength minion, and you get a good outcome if they Epidemic. You get the 10 strength fiend, which is really good. And I think Skellige have some 0 strength medics with the Hafkaran healers, so they're pretty good to protect as well. Might be hard to use on turn 1, but yeah, so this is one way to counter the Epidemic as well. So the next thing is that any non-hero encouraged units will protect versus the weather and Epidemic combo. So the reason it has to be non-hero encouraged units is because we want them to be affected by the weather effect. So if you've got a board full of random, numbers, and then they get weathered, they're all going to go down to 1 strength. Okay, now it's your turn. If you place the non-hero encouraged unit on the board, his strength will go down to 1. So at the minute, you've got a board full of 1 strength, which is really bad. But then the encouraged person is going to give +2 strength to everybody else on that row apart from himself. So what you'll be left with is a row with 3 strength, 3 strength, 3 strength, 1 strength encouraged unit, and he's going to take the blunt of the epidemic, and then you've got 3 strength, blah blah blah. So we're using that encourage to take a hit from the epidemic, which would be completely wasted epidemic, to be honest. Now you could later on medic out that encouraged person again with a 0 strength medic, and but don't forget, at that particular scenario, that encouraged person is still going to be the lowest strength because he's going to be on 1 still, and the 0 strength medic will now have 2 strength. So that it's all about that encouraged person. But if they're wasting an epidemic from that 1 encouraged person, that's actually pretty good. You could consider putting mushrooms into your deck. This would increase your strength through the weather, so you'll go down to 1 strength, and then the mushroom would bring you back up to 5. Mushrooms are really good defensively for protecting against, well, not protecting, but getting some nice strength through weather effects. So even if you can't get rid of it all the time, you're still getting a nice strength, especially if you combine it with encourage type cards as well. Now if you do buff it up to 5 strength using a mushroom, you are still vulnerable to epidemic though. So this comes back onto the other point where you bait the enemy foglets onto the board to protect you, because they're going to be 2 strengths. So you might have something like Triss Butterfly spell. She's 11 strength, which is really good, and you use a fog. Obviously it means the opponent hasn't used it, but if the opponent's smart, he won't use it when he wants to epidemic because he knows the foglets are coming out. But yeah, so you can try and bait the foglets onto the board and then start buffing it with mushrooms, just like encourage. So any melee or ranged spies that you might use become a lot more effective because you can essentially negate the strength that you're giving them, the advantage. Because they're guaranteed to be putting Biting Frost down and Impenetrable Fog, you are essentially giving them 8 strength, but it goes down to 1 unless you clear weather. You have to be careful about that. And Yavin becomes very, very good in this sort of case because Yavin gives them 8 strength, you draw a card, but it also minuses 2 from everyone else on that row. And that's really, really powerful, especially if you put it on like the fog row, so all the foglets are 0 strength. And because it's a monster deck, the monster deck ability is to keep 1 card on the board between rounds. And if they keep Yavin on the board, then they're going to also keep the -2 encourage ability on the board. So -2 to everyone on that row between 2 rounds. That's really, really good. So he becomes very effective. And finally, we've got the promotion card. Now, promotion, we don't quite know how it works yet, but anything with the promotion ability, which turns a card into a hero, is going to protect you against weather and epidemic. We don't know how effective it's going to be yet, but for now, any card that has the promotion card is one that you would choose over something else, providing it gives you the same sort of benefit. Obviously, you don't choose full-out promotion cards because they're generally not worth as much as other cards. So some extra useful cards that I noticed. Blue Boy Lugos is actually pretty good because when he creates the Whale of the Cave of Dreams, that's going to be a 0 strength minion on the opposing side of the board, so it'll protect you against epidemic, and it minuses 2 off the row that it's on, so he will protect you against epidemic. Obviously they could decoy up the whale and then place them on your side, but again, it still protects you against epidemic, so still pretty good. Geralt Igni is actually going to be one of the greatest cards ever made. No, he's very, very good against this deck in particular because it gets rid of Biting Frost and it scorches their melee row, which is really, really powerful. But Geralt Igni is going to be very good at the moment because the meta is basically around melee orientated decks, but like I said, that's just because of the lack of card availability, but he's still really good against this particular deck. Sarah's going to be good. She will be a clear weather that you can decoy up and keep using. Prize winning cow we've already spoken about, really good. Triss Butterfly spell, 11 strength is really nice, and if you need to bait the foglets onto the board, then she's the lady for you, because it's not that much strength to deal with. You know, 2, 4, 6, possibly 12 strength if your commander's horns the row, so it's not that big of a deal, and it's good to protect against epidemic. And Shani, so she is a medic which also promotes the unit, so she's a pretty good card to try and keep some strength on the board. So thanks for watching, everyone. I hope that helped on trying to create a deck, build a deck that would combat this, because I think, although I was worried initially, I think it's actually possible to build a deck that would counter Epidemic weather. You just got to put in things that counter Epidemic more than things that counter the weather, because they're not going to be placing a whole lot of cards onto the board anyway. And like, if you've got a Scorch, then they're going to have the highest strength minions on the board, and if you can get rid of a couple of their minions, it really does hurt them, because their deck is split up into about, you know, 40-60 special units, or something like 50-50-ish. So just getting rid of like Wild Hunt Riders really hurts them early on, or Wild Hunt Warriors. It's really, really painful getting rid of just that stuff. So, I mean, they're not going to have much strength. But thanks for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time for more Gwent.